What's good, YouTube? It's Mirror Boys Cody back in another video. Let's talk about board breakers for the upcoming NAWCQ, which is happening this weekend. We already talked about hand traps, but I think actually board breakers are pretty good right now because a lot of decks like Castira, hand traps are just abysmal. You're just kind of going -1, whereas board breakers, you can take care of their end board, especially with decks that struggle against a Rise Heart, and you definitely want to deal with it. It's a lot easier just dealing with it with a board breaker as opposed to a hand trap and hoping that they're unable to make a Rise Heart, and then if they still do, you're kind of out of luck, even if you have a hand trap. So without further ado, let's dive in. Starting at the top, Book of Eclipse. We have 4 categories here: amazing, good, mid, and terrible. I think Book of Eclipse is between good and amazing right now. The only issue with Eclipse is that it loses to Ash first and foremost because it includes the effect that draws. And then the other thing is a lot of Castira players are actually starting to play Forbidden Lance again, so it could be a little bit volatile there. But the thing I like about this is it's an offensive card as it is defensive. You can use it on the defense. Even if your opponent draws in the end phase, at least you're not going to die that turn, so you can still play your following turn. So in that sense, I want to say it's good for now, but it could be close to amazing because it does deal with a lot of boards. It doesn't target, and it hurts a lot of decks, but it doesn't hurt Link decks because it can't be flipped face down. So if you're staring something like a Borrow End, you can't really deal with that easily with the Book of Eclipse. So let's just leave it in good for now. Cosmic Cyclone, I actually want to say is amazing. This card is a very, very powerful card this format because of the fact that there's so many spells and traps that are floating around that do a lot of damage in the metagame or act as starters for some of the best decks. So like any field spell like the Castira Planet, which allows them to add, even using this, setting it turn 1 and using it in response to the field, sometimes that's your only play. The Castira deck bricks a lot, so using this in response to a field spell could just be a turn ender for them. It could also be used on Castira Birth. It can be used on things like Branded Regained, as well as Branded Beast cards that may be annoying and could pop your cards during your turn. So going second, it's good. Against Skill Drain, Ghost Match, Labyrinth is floating around. There are a lot of decks that are making use of continuous traps, continuous spells, field spells. So I think this card is actually amazing and good enough to be in a lot of main decks actually as a board breaker of choice. Dark Hole is next. I want to say this is kind of mid, to be honest, but it could be between good. The issue with Dark Hole is that it's only decent against Castira because you want to get rid of a Rise Heart, but if they're a decent player, they're going to attach the Infinitrack Goliath onto the Rise Heart, which means that it cannot be destroyed by card effects, so you might be staring at a blank Dark Hole in your hand if they resolve the Pot of Prosperity in tandem with your Rise Heart combo. So that's why I don't really like this card, but I think it could be between good and mid because the nice thing is it can also be used on the offense when you want to get rid of a floodgate monster that they happen to give to you, like an Ibli, which would Ibli lock you. So being able to clear that as well as clear your opponent's monsters is quite important. So for that reason, I actually think it's a lot better than Raigeki. And speaking of Raigeki, I think I'm going to put it in terrible right now. I don't think it's really that good against a lot of the decks. Against dragons, they have Omni Negates, for example. Against Branded, it does nothing. Against Labyrinth, it does not a lot either. Lady Labyrinth can't be destroyed while they have set cards. Against Castira, it's again like okay, but if they have Goliath or Lance, you're kind of out of luck. So in my opinion, I don't really like it. I think it's still playable, so it could be in the mid, between mid and terrible, but it's definitely not your first choice. You have a lot of better cards than that. Dark Ruler is obviously amazing because it deals with a lot of the decks, including the Sprite decks, which put up a huge board right now. And the fact that they can't really interact with it with a Sprite Red, or a Sprite Carrot rather, which is their typical negate for like a board wipe like Dark Hole or Raigeki, in my opinion, I quite like it. And I think it should be sided at 3 in every deck. Going second, even against Castira, if you're playing a combo deck like Tearlaments or Dragon, you definitely want to have something that's a blanket wipe. And being able to get a 2-for-1 at least off of one card is very important in today's modern metagame because you want to have as many cards as you can in order to mount a comeback, and then also have enough defenses on the offense, on the defending turn, on the next turn, so your opponent can't wipe out your board on the crackback, right? So this card I think does a lot of value. Evenly Matched, I actually want to say is good right now. It's between good and amazing because a lot of people have actually forgotten about it evenly and they're not respecting it anymore. So catching them out of the blue with Evenly Matched is absolutely crazy. You know, a lot of players are siding anti-spell Fragrance again because there's so many powerful spell card non-engine as well as starters in the current metagame. So this is a clean answer to their board as well as anti-spell Fragrance. The only caveat is if you're playing against Castira and they have a Rise Heart and a board, they just leave their Rise Heart on the table and then they're able to attach something, for example, a Castira Big Bang, which means that they still have the banish on the Rise Heart on top of being able to resurrect a Fenrir that they could use with Big Bang's effect. effect. So you kind of have to deal with the Arise Heart after the fact. So if you're playing against a deck that relies on the graveyard and you're playing against Kashtira, you may have to consider your choices because Evenly will always have to be paired with something, whereas Dark Ruler just gets rid of the entirety of the problem, in my opinion. Also, skipping your battle phase is a very scary clause in today's metagame, especially when battle destruction is so important. A lot of effects trigger in the battle phase, like Fenrir as well. Runic decks also skip their battle phase, so this is only really useful going first or on your turn 1 rather, going second. So that's why I want to leave it at good for now. I actually think Chalice is mid. It could actually potentially be playable. The issue is there are a lot more better cards right now to play over Chalice. For example, Dark Ruler, you know, even Cosmic Cyclone, Book of Eclipse are just better. And Impermanence, obviously. Chalice is nice that it's a spell card, which you can use at your 6. It's also good as a board breaker card because you're not investing your Imperm into something like a Unicorn on their turn, and then on your turn, it's kind of like they still get the Arise Heart. Obviously, you can wait with the Imperm, but the thing with Imperm is you have to use it as a first action when your board is blank, so they can kind of play around the fact that their card is already Imperm. Whereas Chalice, you can use it at the last possible moment in a last-ditch effort to negate a card. So I think it's mid. It's decently playable, but there are a lot better cards, so we're going to leave it at mid for now. I actually think Forbidden Lance is between amazing and good right now. It's not really a board breaker card per se, but it's still a powerful non-engine that deals with a lot of cards in the metagame right now that are very annoying. Things like the Runic cards, which obviously target a monster. Even like the Kashtira Wraithos pop is still a spell trap effect, so you can protect your monster with Lance when they try to pop it. Obviously, cards like Infinite Impermanence. There are a lot of cards like Dark Ruler as well. So being able to, especially in the Kashtira deck, protect your Arise Heart so you can still have the banishing effect against your opponent's deck, which typically shuts down a lot of decks in the format right now, is extra important. You have the added benefit of reducing a monster's attack by 800, so you could potentially use it in the battle phase to crash over something that's larger than yours. It's a very good card, I think, right now because there's so much spell and trap non-engine removal floating around. So in my opinion, I think it's a good. I think the thing with Droplet, it's between mid and terrible, but we're going to put it in terrible right now just because of the existence of Arise Heart. The fact that you cannot send to graveyard as a cost when Arise Heart is on the table means that you're not able to activate Droplet at all. But the minute that Arise Heart is disappearing from this format when the ban list hits, then I think Droplet will have a lot of utility. There are a lot of cards that want to be in the graveyard right now. For example, in Dragon Link, you don't really care if you're ditching certain dragons. You can ditch like a Safer and use the effect in the graveyard, get some value back. So this card has a lot of applications, and I think it's very good that you can use it going first as well, especially in a deck like Runic, whereas Dark Ruler, you can only use it going second. So it's very nice, has that nice interaction there. The only caveat is that Arise Heart kind of nukes it out of orbit right now, but once Arise Heart's gone, I think this will definitely be between good and amazing, but for now, let's put it for terrible just for this event. Kaijus are between mid and good. It's hard to say right now. It depends on your deck. It could be good because you want to get rid of Arise Heart easily. It also deals with a lot of other rogue stuff like Pureleys. When you cannot get rid of an X-Purely Noir, this allows you to take care of that and potentially win on the turn. So in my opinion, for that reason, I think it's between good and mid, but skewing towards good because there are a lot of like pesky monsters that kind of deal with stuff. There are a lot of decks that can mount a Zeus with multiple materials now, so being able to just get rid of it with one card, a clean 1-for-1 trade going second, I think is quite nice. So if you're playing a deck that relies on heavy combos and you need high impact cards to remove powerful floodgate monsters like X-Purely Noir or Arise Heart, then this could be very good Kaiju siding in your side deck. HOBBIES Feather Duster is obviously, in my opinion, amazing right now. The issue with this card is that it doesn't do anything when you're going first, whereas Cosmic Cyclone actually does something. You can use it against one of your starters, your opponent's starters, as a defensive option, but HOBBIES Feather Duster is very high impact. It always is a 2-for-1 at least. In today's metagame, everyone's setting cards against decks like Labyrinth. You could just win on the spot. You guys saw what happened in the top 4 of the WCQ and Euros, where literally this card was activated against the Labyrinth player and wiped out their entire back row leading up to a handshake, instant handshake, and the game was over from there. So this card is obviously very high impact. Should it get banned? Probably not, but it's high impact, and I think that you should definitely be siding it. Herald of the Abyss, the only reason why I'm bringing this card up is because it does have some application against Purelies, because that deck is actually being played again. Remember, this card forces your opponent to send the X Purely Noir to the graveyard, so it can actually deal with it easily, and it can also deal with the Rise Heart as well. Now that there's only one Dark Machine on the field, it means that they're not going to have the Diablosis because it's banned, so this is always going to be live against the Rise Heart. They're only going to have one. Against Purelies, they could have a set quick play, which allows them to summon a Pure Lily. That would be unfortunate, because they could then send the Pure Lily instead of the X Purely Noir, which is a Dark, I believe, Fairy as well. But I don't think they always have that, and this is just nice to get rid of a Rise Heart as well as Purely monsters, or against other decks, you can just get rid of an annoying monster that's kind of in your path. So it's kind of nice that you have that option, in my opinion. It could be playable, but let's leave it at mid for now. Currykara, I actually think it's between mid and good, but we'll put it for good for the sake of it being very good against Kashtira, because if they use Shangri-La effect in the standby, and then you bait out the Arise Heart to banish the effect to attach rather when you banish a card, then you contribute both of them and slam a 4500 attack Currykara on the table that allows you to resurrect a Fenrir in the end phase from their graveyard. So in my opinion, it could be a very, very high impact card as long as you play enough spell cards or cards to bait out the Arise Heart, because that's a problem. Otherwise, you're going to have to invest your monsters onto the field, and then when they start banishing that, they already get value out of the Arise Heart, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't trade in as well. Typically, it would be better if you had a spell card, something like a Terraforming or like a Reinforcement of the Army, anything to trigger the Arise Heart, and then from there, just slam the Currykara so they don't get the banish effect, and you get a free 2-for-1 trade. So I think it's pretty good. Lavagirl Aluma, I want to say between mid and good right now. I actually think it's quite good because you can deal with the Arise Heart Shangri-La boards. A lot of players are choosing not to go Arise Heart Pass because they realize that that doesn't deal with a lot of the power crept deck combos in the metagame. So being able to Lavagirl Aluma over that is quite nice. Also being able to Lavagirl Aluma over annoying boards. Even sometimes versus Labyrinth, you can get some value out of this by attributing over their lady, so it's not always dead. And against Sprite, it's generally quite good because you get to choose which cards to get rid of. Against the Runics, you could get rid of the Link monster as well, so then that way they're not going to be able to draw a bunch of cards. You get rid of the Fogo, you can get rid of IP Masquerena, you can get rid of Griffin. It's just very, very nice that you have that option, so I think it's quite good as well. Between Dark Ruler and Lavagirl Aluma, these cards are both quite good. Lightning Storm, I think, is actually between good and mid. Let's put it in good because it has the modal benefit of you choosing whether to punish your opponent for putting in a Rise Heart in attack mode if they wanted to play around Zeus, for example, or being able to snipe back row. The only annoying factor about this card is it's still a normal spell card, so if they're siding in anti-spell fragrance, it's completely dead in your hand. Also, it's not very good drawing it mid to late game because you're going to have cards on the board, and this can only be activated when you have no face-up cards. But I think it's still good enough to play. It has a lot of utility against every deck, basically. It can even be used against Labyrinth as a Harpy's Feather Duster going second, so it's still quite good in my opinion. It's just the weather of determining, matter of fact, if there are better cards to play in your specific deck over Lightning Storm before choosing this card. So that's why I think it's between good and mid, but we'll put it in good as a card for now. The Winged Dragon Rust Spear Mode, personally, I want to say it's mid because of the fact that it's so specific. You have to tribute exactly 3 monsters. Obviously, against Kashtira, if they go Shangri-La, summon Fenrir with the Arise Heart, they have 3 monsters. But if the opponent is at least somewhat competent, they're going to realize that you probably play Winged Dragon Rust Spear Mode in a deck like Labyrinth or a deck that does not rely on a lot of summons. Or forbid they actually see this card in game 2 and then they realize, okay, they're playing Winged Dragon of Raw Spear Mode. I can just commit 2 monsters to the table and then your Winged Dragon of Raw Spear Mode is completely dead in your hand. So that's the only issue with this against Kashtira. But against other decks like Sprite where they're just flooding the board, this card can be very good because you're just getting rid of 3 monsters, whereas Lavagirl Aluma only gets rid of 2, right? So it has that added benefit. So it could be between good and mid depending on the metagame, depending on what decks you're anticipating. But personally, I'm going to put it beneath Lavagirl Aluma for now just because of the fact that it's harder for your opponent to get 3 monsters on board and they can play around it easily. Tripathaks Talent is an amazing card in my opinion. This should be at 2 or 3 in basically every deck right now. It's the only card that deals with the Arise Heart board when you have nothing on the table. All you have to do is bait out that Arise Heart activation, activate Talent, say I'm going to take something, then they're forced to use the Arise Heart to banish themselves, but if they have other monsters on the board, you can steal the other monsters, you can attack and make Zeus with the Shangri-La if you play Zeus, otherwise you can steal the Fenrir, use the effect to banish their cards, and start winning the game from there. It's basically always a 2-for-1, and on top of that, going first, if they hand trap you, if they ash you, you can snipe their hand, rip out the 1-card starter they have so they just lose the duel on the spot. You're able to draw cards mid to late game so you can see more more of your extenders, more of your combo starters. It's just such a good card right now in today's metagame where every monster effect is activating in the main phase, in my opinion. Against Sprite, you still get some value out of it. So I think it's an amazing card right now, and it should be at the top of the top. Tripathaks Rust I think is good. It's not quite as amazing because going first is a lot worse. Obviously, you have to set a trap card which cannot be activated until your opponent's following turn, and you have to probably play a trap card like Daruma Cannon, which is not good against every deck. It's a lot better going second, obviously, because you're able to search for your engine pieces as well, and it can be used when an opponent's monster effect is used in any phase, not just main phase. So if they use Shangri-La and standby, you could go main phase, activate Thrust, and then add a Tactics, and then because the Rise is the mandatory activation on the Thrust banish, that's going to activate and your Tactics will be live. So that's just one thing to keep aware of. I think it's good for that reason because it's not as good going first. Change of Heart, I want to actually say is very good right now. The only bad thing about this card is that it targets. Targeting cards are generally a lot worse because they can deal with it easily with something like, for example, IP Masquerena against Sprites, against Kashtira, you know, they can chain lands, and then it just is a 1-for-1 trade. But I think it's still really good because it baits out a trade interaction against an Arise Heart. They banish themselves. If they're caught lacking with an Arise Heart on the table that's already used the effect, you can steal it, make a Zeus, or steal a Fenrir and start banishing things. It's just a very versatile card. And I think it has a lot more value going second, obviously. Going first, it's dead, whereas Tactics, you have the option to rip their hand or draw cards. So obviously, it cannot be better than Tactics, in my opinion. Enemy Controller, I think, is amazing in the right deck. Obviously, in Kashtira, that's the first deck that comes to mind because you're always going to be able to steal something going second. And in response to an effect activation that's negating your Fenrir or Unicorn, for example, an Imperm or a Veiler or like a Sprite card, you get an additional value by tributing that monster that was already negated and then baiting out another interaction or stealing a potential XYZ, slamming into their monster and making Zeus. Going first, it has the added utility of being able to steal an opponent's monster as disruption. You always typically have adequate monsters to tribute in a deck like Kashtira unless you're going like Arise Heart Pass, but it's still a really, really good card in the grind game, especially in Kashtira decks. So in my personal opinion, I think it's quite amazing. Just have to ensure that the deck you play this in has a way to deal with the monster that you steal, for example, making Zeus on top of it or linking it off later. Ultimate Slayer is another card that I think is between mid and good. We'll want to say mid right now because not a lot of decks have the extra deck space to actually play this card because you do have to play a lot of cards to support it. But the nice thing is now you can actually play Tri-Brigade Bucephalus, which allows you to play Garura as well. So you no longer have to play the Evil Twins for the Link monster. You're always able to send Bucephalus against the Link monster, send the Garura off his effect, and then draw a card. And then that gives you a fusion target in the Garura as well. So you're not wasting extra deck or main deck space to play the Evil Twin stuff that we previously played with Trouble Sunny. And it's very nice because you can send Meteorologic Aggregator as an XYZ to negate a Floodgate as well, like a Skill Drain or a Field Spell, Runic Field Spell. You can also send a Cyframe Gear Omega in order to shuffle back something, so on and so forth. I think it's mid right now because not a lot of decks have extra deck space besides like Kashtira and besides maybe Vanquish Soul, but this card is a cost, so it conflicts with D-Shifter, so it's a little worse than Kashtira in my opinion. And then last but not least, actually Twin Twister I think is between mid and good. The reason why I want to put it in good right now is because of the fact that it's very good against Eradicator. And what I mean by this is if you're going second and the Eradicator you calling spells, you can chain Twin Twister, discarding another one of your spells, so you're converting 2 of your cards that would have been lost to Eradicator against 2 of their cards. And half of the time, if you're able to use this in response to an Eradicator and wipe their other 2 back row, because they invest a lot of cards into the Eradicator play by searching it off of Lady, so they're not going to have a lot of defenses. So if you can snipe 2 other cards and you have at least 1 monster starter, like in Kashtira, a Fenrir or a Unicorn, or any other deck that has starters, like even like a Nimble Beaver, sometimes it's enough for you to mount a comeback and actually win on the spot, or come back in a dominating fashion because you converted 2 of your cards for 2 of theirs, and then you don't really care about the rest of the spells. You're minimizing the damage that Eradicator did to you because this is a quick play that is a 2-for-2 trade. So that's the only reason why I actually think this is quite decent, but only against Labyrinth. It's obviously a lot worse against the other decks because you don't really care. Every deck is just playing 1 Floodgate like Anti-Spell Fragments, and discarding is actually quite hefty nowadays. You do need every card in your hand in the modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh, so this is a little worse, but I still think it's good because of the Eradicator interaction. So yeah, that's about all I had for this video. If you guys had any more tips or any more cards that we're missing out, definitely let us know below. Other than that, we'll see you guys this weekend at WCQ. Bye-bye.